Um, on my side, I managed to catch up on everything, so that's been great. And I think it was a good wake-up call on how often we tell ourselves things like we say we're going to do something to ourselves and we don't do it, and that's really made me conscious of the fact that you build beliefs around that. So it's it's almost stopping and saying, yes, I'm not going to actually do that. I forgive myself and I'll do it another time, or I'm going to do it then. That kind of was quite a good thing to think about. And then the other thing was I still need to do the debugging, but that's I'm set up time to do that tomorrow. So
Okay. And so what did you sort of get out of the process you said about realizing that you're not necessarily doing what you say you're going to do? Like, how much of that was there?
well, I mean, I think it's often like you say, okay, I've set time aside to do this for myself, or I've set time to do this for the project. And often you'll put something else in place of it, especially when work sort of things come up. So it's almost like I've said to myself, I'm going to do something and then I'm not. Like it's those kind of things that I've caught a little bit of that I'm doing that.
Okay. And I mean, but what I'm wondering is specifically how much of it did you notice you're doing?
As in, like, I suppose if we do it every day, I suppose, there's often things that you said I'm gonna do today, and it doesn't always happen that way.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a difference obviously between in your mind thinking, okay, I'd like to do that today versus I'm
Yeah,
going to do that today. Right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
The real question to also address is when you are finding yourself catching that and saying, wait a minute, actually, I didn't do that, right? And you
Yeah.
clean it up with yourself. How does that leave you then?
Well, it makes you feel a little bit more like, okay, you're not beating yourself up about it,
Yeah.
and making yourself believe that you can't do it. And I think that's the big thing is the more you say to your mind, I'm going to do something, you don't do it, make your mind starts to believe that you're not trustworthy almost, so you stop trusting yourself.
Right.
Yeah. So it almost frees it up a little bit to be like, okay, yeah, I didn't do this. I'm sorry about that, but you can still trust me because I will do it. I will get it done because I can do it.
Right. I mean, it relates to, imagine yourself as two people, right?
Hmm.
And when you're promising yourself something, that's another person that you're promising it to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, looking at how many times in a day you might promise yourself something that you then don't do, right?
Yeah.
If you were the person receiving the promises in real life, right?
Mm-hmm.
How long would it take you to lose faith in that person?
Oh, very quickly. So I think there's all good saying sorry, but it's also making sure that you start doing the things you tell yourself you're going to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's also true, right? That like when you just keep saying you're sorry over and over again, it's not much better.
No, exactly. Yeah.
It's like someone apologizes to
You
you.
need to say, like, if I've told myself I'm definitely going to do this, that I'm going to do it. And there's a couple of times I've told myself I'm going to do stuff like going on a date by myself to the coffee shop, and I was like, oh, maybe I won't do it today. And I was like, no, you're doing it, and force actually making yourself do it, and once you're there, it's awesome. But often your mind will come up with reasons not to do it, and it's kind of almost being aware that that's happening and pushing yourself past it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean that's really the purpose in a way of the entire exercise, right? Is to start to build trust with yourself,
Mm-hmm.
and meaning then, of course, in that relationship we deal with between the conscious and subconscious, that there's a trust relationship getting built up because it's not really there by itself, right?
Yeah, no, definitely.
And what about you guys quietly on the picture up there? Hello? Hello?
Yes, okay. So actually, with possibilities is we have to pack, and we have no idea when we're moving because we have to wait till they get a certificate of occupancy. So supposedly it's the 31st, which gave us a month. So we may move January 15th, or may not even be till February. I mean, it could even be March, which we don't think so. But there's three things that I really did not want to pack, and it's just like a block because it takes a lot of work to decide. So that would be the downstairs closet, would be my jewelry, and it would be files. So actually, reading all your book and then listening to you, it really gave me the impetus. So we started with the basement and listing more items for sale and selling quite a bit. So that was really good because it showed the possibility if you do it.
Okay, and so basically you had planned to do that, then you were going to not do it. So you did it because you said you needed to do it.
Right. It had to be done, but it was like the part that you sort of wait till the end and then you can't get it done well.
Right. Got you. Okay, great.
Mike, I think we're at a stage where we're still redefining the project itself and narrowing it down to what is realistic and working on that. We're trying to stay committed to actually doing what we say we're going to do, and we're not doing a great job of filtering out all of the interference that stops us from doing what we say we're going to do. So we need to do a lot better at doing that and be a little bit more committed to what we're attempting to get done.
Okay. Well, I mean, what does that mean, a little bit more committed?
I'm sorry, say it again.
I'm curious what you mean by a little bit more committed.
It's difficult in a two-person objective where one may not want to do something and the other one does, and therefore your incentive to get something, be committed to get it done, is not possible with the other person. So yeah, there's a lot of action going on trying to get dual commitment.
Okay, so there's an issue around how do you create unified integrity?
Correct.
Okay, and I suppose ultimately that just goes down to your agreements, right?
Right, exactly.
I mean, Beth has the challenge that she's talking about what she promises herself, right? But for you
Yes.
guys in the project, as you're working on it, you have to also uphold your promise to your partner.
Right.
Okay, so how is that different?
Different from Beth?
Well, yeah, how is it different from upholding the promise to yourself?
Well, you promise yourself you're going to get something done today, and you're committed to get it done, but we're not handling the outside interference that's stopping a lot of it getting done, either from the other individual and or other instant, constant phone calls or people coming or other obligations that come up. So just we need to commit ourselves to do more and do what we say we're going to do for the day.
Uh-huh. Okay. So something to consider, right, is, and Beth, this certainly can apply to you when it does, right?
Mhm.
Is that, if you're in a partnership or, collective of people, the getting stuff done that you promised to get done, I mean, you'll notice in Beth's case, it's really a matter of like honoring the promise, right? So if the promise can't get done, to say, oops, I shouldn't have made that promise, I can't get it done, you're not just ignoring it. But when you've taken on a promise that is collective, you know, we are left with the situation where we have to actually somehow cause it to get fulfilled, regardless of what the other people do, right?
Yeah, if you want to get it done, yeah.
Yeah, well, if we want to, you know, get it done on the one hand, and, you know, if we want to be aligned with our promise, right? So another way to look at that situation is to go, hey, okay, you know, if there's a dispute between parties in a collective or team situation, we have to deal with what is the agreement, right?
Right, both have to be more committed. Yeah.
Well, and that brings me back to the question I asked you, which I want to say, what do you mean by more committed?
Saying what you're going to do, doing what you say you're going to do.
Okay. Is that a factor of commitment?
Is that a factor of commitment?
Yes, that's the question.
Yeah, I would say so. You know, if you have a plan and you're trying to get stuff done and it's not happening, and then you have to tell yourself to be more committed to get it done and handle the outside interference based on priorities, and learn to say no, as you say, and filter out other outside interference.
Right, and I mean, that's kind of the way that you're used to doing it, right?
That's what?
It's more or less the way that you're used to approaching that situation. So if there's a couple of suggestions I can make around that might be of use, right? One, is that fine?
Yes.
Okay, so one would be that, you know, when you look at the question of commitment, consider it as, you know, that kind of situation that's like being a pregnancy, right? Consider it's either commitment or not commitment. So to simplify things, instead of trying to get more committed, it might be simpler to just get committed. Right? And the difference is that commitment basically leaves no room for failure. Because if you're committed and you don't get what you wanted, then you're left with the commitment, right? And it's a fairly off-kilter distinction, but since we have a few people on the call, you know, I'll just deal with it for a minute, which is the distinction between being committed to something and attached to something. Okay, does that make, do you get the clarity of what I'm about to talk about?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you're committed to something, it means that you are you know, going to go through the process until it happens, right? If you're attached to something, the definition that I was given some years back, which has really changed my understanding of commitment, is that being attached is like, without getting that thing, you'll die. Right? And being attached brings us to a situation where two things happen. One is, if the thing doesn't happen according to the plan, what are you left with? You're left with the failure to have it happen, right?
True.
Whereas when you're inside of commitment instead of attachment, you're ending up left with the commitment and you carry on with the commitment, right? So pulling it back to a point with teamwork and integrity, if you're committed to the promise that you made jointly, right? Then if it doesn't happen, you simply carry on making it happen, right?
Correct.
If you're committed.
Correct. So you'll notice if it results in some kind of dispute, right? It's probably connected to the fact that you're not committed. Rather, you're attached, which means that the result you're looking for isn't the result you say you're looking for. Right? Like in teams, there's always results like wanting to look like you're better, or expressing frustration, or maybe an old disagreement that never got cleared up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because the bottom line is, I'm dealing with a conversation like this right now with a partner I'm working with, developing a collaboration sort of management thing. And, collaboration's hard, right? Because there's Beth now talking about how much she's noticed she doesn't keep her own promises, how she didn't even want to go on her date with herself, and obviously it's easier to go on a date with someone that you've made a plan with, right? Because otherwise you're not showing up. But at the same time, it's harder to work with other people because they then get their own ideas, and now you have to be responsible for their problems, right? But if we go back to the basics of the notion of what integrity is all about, simply says that you'll do what you say, right?
Yes.
And you mentioned all the outside forces that might conspire against that getting done. And it's kind of a very advanced conversation to start looking at how do you actually deal with that without resistance, right? For now, what's important is, and I want to flip forward in a minute to what we're going to do today, but I just thought it was good to stop here for a moment and look at that. Like when you're dealing with integrity in your project together, it's the same question you're dealing with at every point of this process together, right?
Yes.
I mean, at every point of the process, you might, as individuals, come to things with a different perspective. Now, the challenge becomes, how do you let go of your individual perspectives and have a team perspective, right? Does that make sense? Huh?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the challenge I think that I would throw at you is, how do you make sure that you have clear, a situation that's clear in this project where each step of the way you're dealing with the team's situation, not one or the other of you taking the perspective and having the other person have to come to terms with it. That make sense?
Exactly.
Right. And starting with integrity, the simple question is, what is the agreement? You can always alter the agreement, but you can't do it without agreeing to alter it, right? And that's another thing that makes it difficult when we're dealing with ourselves, because Beth can just go in her head and say, oh, I'm going to alter my agreement with myself, right? But then if she's going to do that, she'd have to come up with an alternate plan. So anyway, that's the long story about that. So consider that stuff, right?
Yes.
But I'd like to get looking at today's topic, which is, as the screen shows. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so as the screen shows, today's topic is possibility, right? Just to pop back on the process we're going through, you see possibility is almost already at the top. Can you believe that? We've gone through all these steps in order to get to the point where we're actually dealing with thinking of ideas, right? If you've had ideas before now around your project, that's a bonus. Because the process itself has a whole lot of those other things before we get to this, right? And it's a funny thing because most people want to get ideas like the minute they sit down, right? And if you're working in a team, if you guys have ever done brainstorming, in a company or something like that, generally the way that works is you show up and you start brainstorming, right? There's no steps to creating a safe space together. There's no steps to creating like a focused idea of what the team is that's working on this, and making sure that people actually are going to keep their promises and work with a system, right? None of that happens. So when I've done this training with companies, it's you know, it's so critical, those first steps, because getting to the point of coming up with ideas, all you end up with is people coming up with the ideas they would have come up with anyway, right? I mean, there's no point of you going through 8 weeks of this if you're just going to come up with the same ideas that you started with. Are you with me? So today, we're looking at the topic of possibility, and I want us to start with a very simple game. I don't think we did this one before, did we?
So,
No.
I do this thing so many times, I sometimes forget if I jumped ahead. Simple game. Write down a few things. You know, ideally it's always 5, right? But it doesn't have to be 5. A few things that you wish you could. This ideally will be around your project because it keeps you focused on that. But if something pops in your head that's outside your project, that's okay. So I wish I could have a company of 50 people call me today and ask me to come train them tomorrow. Make sense? Oh, you're already doing it. Fantastic.
Yeah, already doing it.
Okay.
How are we doing?
Okay, we're
Good.
ready. Yeah,
You guys want to go first?
whatever. You can
Okay.
go. Oh,
Okay. You I have to read all of them, Michael.
Up to you.
Okay, well, the one that you mentioned was I wish I could sell hundreds of places for my course in the future. And then I wish I could write my book that I already have the idea for. And something that kept coming up to me is that I wish I was 2 steps ahead of where I am now.
Okay.
Even though like I've got the safety, I've got all of that, there's always that part of your mind that wishes that it was already done, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Okay. So primarily you wish you were farther along in the stuff you're doing.
Yeah, because I know in the timeline of that, what I've given myself, I'm exactly where I should be, but I wish I was already 2 months further down the line and that it was already done and out of my head and on paper. Because there's a lot of stuff I need to get out of myself and it can be draining at times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Next.
Go ahead. No, you go.
Okay. So in reference to the project, I wish I could come to a decision on what mover we're going to use.
Okay.
Number two, I wish I could complete all this packing so I could get it over with and relax. 3, create a smooth transition move to New York with all the variables on both the Kentucky and New York side. And 4, start making decisions on items for all that we need for the new residents, rather than waiting to the last minute or long term to get them done.
Okay. So you wish you could do all those things.
Right. And then I guess everyone wishes that your rough spot of climbing the mountain wasn't there. So my first thing is that we were in New York already. That we didn't have to pack, that we don't have to worry about my friends and the kids' problems and just deal with our own. Be free of all kinds of cares like that. And more enjoy the process, which I guess we're not enjoying because it becomes a chore to pack and it's stressful. So to try to somehow manage to do everything we have to do, but try to more enjoy it. That's what I wish.
Okay. So basically, on the one hand, you wish you could already be in New York.
Right, then I wouldn't have to do all the stuff.
Right.
I'm with you.
But secondly, you wish you could enjoy everything that you're doing.
Right, to get to New York, because it has to be done. It's like Beth saying she wants, the 2 months to pass, and then she would be done her work, and the book
Right.
would be done. And I think that's, it's just kind of a universal.
Well, it's great that you guys have said what you've said, because it really digs straight into what I want to talk about, right? Which is there's really 2 kinds of possibilities that you've brought up, right? The one possibility you brought up is the kind of possibility that deals with, something external to yourself in a way, right? Like to say you wish you were already in New York is kind of impossible, right?
And absolutely impossible.
Right? It'd be
No,
saying
you
like, I
could
wish I
go
was.
and lay a dig.
I could. I could just leave and go to New York. That's it.
Right. So on the one hand, you wish that there were things possible that, physically in the real world are not possible, right?
Yes.
But then you also both talked about things that, in a sense, could very much be possible, like, for example, enjoying yourself.
Yes.
Right? So what's very important as we deal with coming up with ideas is to start to look at how do we actually approach that process of thinking, right? And this is just a little quote that I quite like. If we desire it, we'll find many ways. if we don't desire it, we'll find many excuses.
Mm, so true.
Apparently, it's Filipino. I don't know, but if we really get straight about what we've just been dealing with integrity, really get straight with ourselves. If you already wanted to be in New York, you'd be there, right? But you chose, for example, a house that's not ready yet.
Right.
So, in a way, it's not honest to say you wish you were in New York already, right? In a way, it is, because you've changed your mind now that you're doing all the stuff you wish that it was already done, right? But what's interesting to notice is the difference between the stuff that you really wish, right, and the stuff that you're just saying. And I particularly love this picture as well. I mean, that's a fish that's possibility thinking, right?
Yep.
He's hoping that he's going to land in the other bowl. And that's unfortunately the way that lots of people deal with possibility, right? As a future thing that might happen.
Right.
Right? And
It's a great
that's
picture.
why, sorry?
That's a great picture.
Isn't it? Because, lots of people love to talk about possibility thinking, right? But it doesn't seem to work out. And it's the same situation. Coming up with ideas is really a form of possibility thinking. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
So when we tend to not have a lot of good ideas around something, it's because somewhere in ourselves we don't think we can have those ideas. Right? But if we look at the notion of possibility thinking, I'm just going to run through a few quotes that people love to reference. Things like Alice saying it's impossible, and Mad Hatter says only if you believe that it's impossible, right? You have people like Henry Ford, great possibility thinker in history, who said he can't discover that anyone who knows enough to say what is possible and what is definitely not possible. And one of the favorite quotes of all time, if he had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Right? So for him, it was possible to create something that other people thought wouldn't work. Right? And therefore, he also said, I'm looking for a lot of people who have an infinite capacity to not know what can't be done. What comes up again and again in these quotes is basically the idea that possibility is the opposite of impossibility, right? And the minute we start rejecting impossibility, possibility arises. So, from the beginning, we say it's impossible only if you believe it is, right? We say, Henry Ford says, I want people that don't understand impossible, right? And probably his greatest quote of all his many great quotes, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right.
Mm-mm.
All of them going back to the same basic point. Thomas Edison had some great quotes like that as well. His great famous quote, which I'm sure we've talked about before, that he basically found 10,000 ways that didn't work to make a light bulb. Right? When he's exhausted all the possibilities, remember that you haven't. Einstein says it's better to believe than disbelieve because that brings everything to the realm of possibility. So rather think it's possible than think it's not, right? And here's another quote that doesn't have an attribution, but it might be Filipino. When you focus on problems, you will have more problems, right?
Mm.
But if you focus on possibilities, then you get more possibilities, opportunities. So all these things sound great, but in your own lives, do you have this experience? Do you have the experience that if you just keep believing something, it'll happen?
Well, I personally have had that, but you also have to take some form of action, a lot of these things. Like a lot of my business, if I didn't believe I could do it, it would never have happened. But you also have to take action along with that belief.
Yeah. we do. I mean, Henry Ford or Edison wouldn't have got much done if they just said these things.
Yeah, that's 100% true. We would all be sitting here in the dark. So,
And yeah, we would struggle with connectivity as well. So, you know, the point is that sometimes what you say is possible happens, right?
mhm.
And sometimes it doesn't happen, right?
Mhm.
So one of the things that that often gets in the way of things happening is a misunderstanding of the whole thing, the whole word possibility. Right. So if I ask you this question, you have the past, the present, and the future, right? And I say to you, where does possibility happen? What
In
would
the
your answer
now.
be?
Now.
Well, you sounded very sure. Beth, you didn't sound so sure.
I was thinking now, but I think it also, I'm thinking also the future. I mean,
See, it is now that it happens, right? And why is it now?
Because you're living in the moment now, and if you do not create the possibility now, you'll never have a possibility in the future. It won't become into fruition in the future. Because in the future, it's not a possibility. Hopefully, it's a condition.
Right. And this is exactly the thing. I mean, for example, this sign, if it's a neon sign like it is here, when do you get your beer?
In the future,
When in the future?
Tomorrow.
tomorrow, the next day.
Okay, so you go back to the bar tomorrow,
yeah.
and they still have the neon sign up, right?
Then you never get it. It's a come on process.
You'll never
An
get
ad-
your beer, right?
Right.
Free beer tomorrow, as long as the sign is permanent. I mean, you're going to go back and it's always going to say tomorrow. I mean, the short answer, what you said is totally on point. The short answer is there is only now, right?
That's so true.
There is no future. There's this thing that we think, you know, might happen in the future. It's mysterious, right? Because we can put things in a calendar and it says we're going to do that on some time and what, but it's all just imaginary. But what we want to start doing is realizing that if possibility is happening entirely in the present, right, then we have a different story.
Right, because if you pack today, then tomorrow you can move because all the boxes are ready.
Right. So again, if you say, I wish it was possible that I could be in New York right now, right?
Right,
Well, that's not possible.
that's true. Because right now it's yes.
And the reason it's not possible, and I seem to have missed the slide here, but do you remember the slides we had with the be, do, have, right?
The what?
The be, do, and have.
Yes.
We looked at the nature of identity being that we need to actually put the being, the identity, before the actions so that it allows us to then generate the actions from the proper place, right? So it's not about doing stuff, it's about how we're being. And that will help us determine what we have to do. Remember that conversation?
Yes.
Okay, so I want to bring that conversation back in here and say, what happens if we stop thinking about possibility as a result and start thinking about it as a way of being and acting? I mean, do you all have the experience sometime in your memory of you think something's not possible, so you don't do it?
Say it again.
Yeah, I say a lot of
Yeah.
the time you think of something that's possible and you say, no, I can't do that.
Right. So
Or,
you think
that's not going to happen.
so it being not possible is a function of the present, right? Because you can't come up with an idea of the way you should be now to make that happen in some future. Therefore, you postpone or right? You might still believe it could be something that could happen, but now at this moment, you don't have any clarity on who you have to be to generate that.
That's kind of like your bucket list, right?
I mean, that could apply, right? You've got this list of things you'd like to do someday, but right now there's no idea how you're going to do them. So you put them on a list and put it in the drawer, right?
Right.
So what's lacking there, if you remember that circles of possibility diagram, what's lacking there is you don't have an idea, right? What creates a possibility is an idea that you believe. Make sense?
Yeah.
Right? So in the present tense now, for you to be a certain way that involves that way of being possible, you can only be that way if you have an idea of how to be that way. And I'd like you to consider that the whole notion you have in your head at this moment of something being not possible in the future is entirely based on the basic thing that you don't have an idea how to be now to make that happen.
Right.
So the level at which your willingness to believe something is possible is directly related to the amount of understanding you have of how to be the way you need to be now. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So you might think something kind of may be possible, which is a ridiculous phrase in the first place, right? But you might have a sense that, like, maybe that's possible. I kind of have an idea what to do now, but it's not clear enough so you think it's a waste of time, right? Or it's not a priority. And this will start to connect directly to the integrity conversation, because at some point, when you have perfect clarity, Beth, if you knew that going on that date, at this moment, you knew that that would cause the results that it caused,
Mm-hmm.
would you have hesitated so much?
No, of course not.
Right? So it's only that somehow in this moment you lost sight of that belief in that being a certain way now
Mm-hmm.
would cause a good result.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And every moment that we're in, we are being certain ways, right? And then those actions will be determined by the ways we're being. So in order for us to start actually having possibility thinking work the way it does for the kind of people that we looked at the quotes from, we have to actually start being 100% in possibility now about whatever the thing is that we're choosing to create possibility with, right? And I assume that you all have the experience that some things, if you're looking at it as a way of being, some ways of being seem easier than others. Like for a lot of people, being lazy is easier than being focused. Some people, it's the other way around, right? So if I had to ask you now to think of of the identity you created a couple weeks ago, which parts of that identity are easy for you to generate anytime, and which parts take, I don't know, the right situation, the right mood, the right feeling to make it easy for you? Any thoughts on that?
So one of the things that came up with what are the ways you would like to be that you aren't yet. So it's like consistent, patient, that kind of stuff came up for me.
Yeah.
And then for me, I do find it easier once I'm in the zone, get going, and things come. They really do. Things come quite easily, and I'm able to create quite easily. It's just that sitting down and doing it that sometimes I find difficult.
Sure. And that's normal, right? what we're aiming for here is to do things in a different way that gives you better results, right?
Yeah.
So if we start to see that the term possibility and the way that people are trying to create, this openness that anything is possible, if we start to see it differently and say that actually anything is possible as a way of being in the present, even if you struggle with some of those ways, they're actually possible, right? I mean, on a simple level, you absolutely know that it's possible, Beth, for you to be focused, right?
Yes.
Because sometimes you are.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the times I am. I
Yeah.
think it's just.
So consider that the way you're being in the moment is a choice.
Mm,
And consider that sometimes you make that choice and other times you don't, right?
yeah.
And we know already that there's natural ways of being that the boxes in our heads, are driving us toward, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's other ways that the boxes aren't driving us toward, and it's harder to get ourselves into the right box there. So I want to look at, for a moment, just how that happens. And I mean, Beth, you being a coach and a sort of experienced psychology thought person,
Yeah.
this should come pretty obviously. So consider that this picture here is what possibility looks like, right? This open, empty page. Same way that you are, Beth, sitting and trying to fill pages with content, right?
Mm-hmm.
Start with an empty page. All possibility is available, right? You could write your name over and over again on the page if you want to, right? You could write something else, but whatever it is, there's absolutely nothing interfering with it, anything being on that page, right? And the problem is that that's kind of the way things are when we're really small, right? So what happens as we go through life? Did anybody here on this call ever, maybe when you were really small, you tried to do something nice with another little kid and they shoved you or something or threw sand in your face? Or you don't remember?
Can't remember.
Well, consider the question. Let's say you were 3 years old, 4 years old, and you're playing in a sandbox, right? And you give another kid your shovel, and that kid hits you with the shovel. Is it likely that some part of you would be more hesitant next time to give some kid you never met before your shovel?
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what happens is, one little part of this empty page gets blocked. Right? Now, I mean, we could go on and on and on, but let's say you're like, I don't know, you're like 7 or 8 years old. Raise your hand in class to answer a question. The teacher calls on you, you forget what the answer was. Other kids think it's very funny and they all laugh at you. Are you likely to possibly hesitate longer next time someone is supposed to answer a question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you get another thing that kind of gets in the
Another
way.
blotch, and pretty soon you have all blotches.
Well, yeah, pretty soon you get that, right?
Yes.
And so when you look at the ways of being that are available to you in any situation, there's a lot less of them, right? In fact, for most grown-ups, it looks a lot like that, right? So in order for us to do the things in a different way and become more flexible, more adaptable, we need to start getting rid of those blotches, right? And unfortunately, one of the ways to get rid of them is to simply be the way that we don't like to be, right?
Yeah, you get out of your comfort zone because you've learned to be comfortable with all the blockages.
Right. Well, that's that's one way of putting it, and one way that people deal with it, right? Is to say, intentionally take yourself out of the way that you'd like to normally do stuff. So you call it getting out of your comfort zone. You can call it building new boxes. You can call it whatever you feel comfortable with. The bottom line of it is, are you willing to take on ways of being that don't feel natural, right? For example, in the situation you're in now with packing, it feels unnatural to enjoy that.
Right, because everything's a mess, everything's dusty, everything's
Right,
in chaos.
right. So for you, the natural way of dealing with that situation is to feel the way you're feeling now, right?
Yes. Yep.
So you are being how? Annoyed? Frustrated? How?
Stressed.
Stressed, okay?
I had to concentrate because it's a mess all the time.
Yep.
No sense in cleaning the floor or dusting because what are you going to dust boxes?
Sure, right? And it's the natural way for you to feel.
Right.
Now, here's two things, though, that we want to notice, right? Do you recognize that other people might feel differently about the situation?
Yes, they could be excited to go into New York, and the more boxes you pack, the more excited you could get because you're leaving one place and you've made a decision you're going. So
Yeah. Okay, cool. So the second question is there a way that you would enjoy more and that might be more productive that you have done or experienced in other situations?
Yeah, if I paid her $20 a box, she'd be much happier.
Okay. What way of being would you be if you got paid $20 a box? From what would be
but it wouldn't help.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, so the first question is, you recognize that your way is not the only way, right?
Absolutely. Yes, I do understand.
That there are other ways that you could be around that.
Right.
Okay, great. The second question then was, do you recognize there are other ways you could be around that that you have successfully been before?
Maybe.
Well,
Have to think on that.
I mean, in your entire life, have you ever been something other than stressed?
Yes, of course. When we moved and came to Kentucky, it was an adventure and it was fun, but we were also 50.
Yeah, that's not the point. The question is, even last week, have you felt something other than stressed?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
And that's like I like selling stuff and meet people and we spend hours with strangers and it's fun.
Okay.
That's,
So you recognize that there are other ways of being that you're capable of.
yes, definitely.
Okay, so you recognize that the situation you're in doesn't necessarily have to connect to the way of being you're having, because other people don't do it that way. And secondly, you're aware that there are other ways of being that you are able to be at other times. Yeah?
Yes.
So what you're calling the comfort zone, right, is really a connection between the situation around you and the inner state that you're choosing.
Definitely.
Right? And
Or that the inner state is choosing me.
well, and that's the question, right?
That is the question.
I mean, the inner state is in you, isn't it?
The inner state, what, Michael?
If you're calling it an inner state, it's inside of you, right?
Yes, it is.
And other people don't necessarily have that response to the situation, right?
100%.
And you have the ability to have other responses.
Yes.
So who's choosing the situation? I mean, who's choosing the response?
To a point.
No, the question is who's choosing the response?
Well, you always are the one who chooses your responses.
Correct, right? So,
Whether you're in the concentration camp, I guess there's lots of ways to be. You can sit there and bemoan the fact you're there, or you can try to find something joyous.
right. So the point of the diagram that's still on the screen here is that the ease of selecting a way of being that is covered by these blotches is harder because we are resistant to those ways of being. We've learned that they don't work, right?
Yes.
And we've attached it to the external circumstance.
Correct.
This then gives us less ability to flexibly have new ideas, right?
Yes.
There becomes only one way of responding to a certain situation. Maybe two ways, but we lose the idea that anything is possible, right?
That's right. But how do you get rid of blotches that are there tattooed on you?
Well, there's a lot of answers to that we can't really achieve in this process because it's another whole process, right?
Right.
But what you can probably easily do is actively, like you said earlier, get out of your comfort zone, right?
Yes.
You can actively select a way of being that you would like to be around this thing that you think might be more productive, for instance, right? And putting yourself in that place, what then arises as ideas that you didn't have before.
That makes sense.
And a good place to look would be the identity that you wrote a couple weeks ago, right?
Right.
So, in theory, you should be being all the elements of that identity, and anything outside of that identity is like a bonus, right?
Yes.
So do you have that handy?
No, I don't know where it is.
Okay. So, for everyone, a really good and important thing would be to actually keep that handy, right?
Right.
So that you are constantly very clear about what that identity is and select from that. So if you're not happy with the experience you're having, with the way of being that you've chosen, and that might be something you measure by looking at the results you're getting out of it, right? And that now keeps repeating with you repeating that way of being, then you are consistently over and over again being the same ineffective way, right? So when you look back at your I wish I statement, right? One of them was you wish you could enjoy this process more.
Yes. Yep.
So what's actually in the way of that happening?
The chaos.
Well, is it?
Yep.
So you said that when you moved to Kentucky, you enjoyed that.
Right.
Okay. So is it the chaos that's causing you to feel that way?
Right, because it's a different stage.
Well, that's just, that's an understanding that you have of something, but the bottom line is at one time, a certain state around you caused a completely different response, right?
Correct, but we were also 22 years younger.
Yeah, that's fascinating, right?
Right.
The question I'm addressing is, do you see that it is actually viable, possible to select a different way of being around the chaos?
So do you, John?
Say it again.
Do you see as that when you were 22 years older, it's difficult because it's chaotic and it's harder to get your mind around it. Do you see that even though it's 22 years later, that there's some way around it?
Well, here's the question. Is it harder to get your mind around it?
Yeah, because if you have to put more things in order, there's so much more to do in your mind, where before at 50, it was easy. It was just, you just did it. Now it takes,
Okay, so what I hear you saying is that 22 years ago, you chose a way of being that made it easier.
and also your mind was different. You have to do, aging does come into the process.
Well, I mean, perhaps. So are you saying that the reason that you are unable to be the way you were then is because your mind has deteriorated physically?
Yes, I would say that's true.
So because your mind has deteriorated physically, you are then unable to enjoy the process.
Well, I don't know. What do you think, John? Say something. Keep thinking. I know.
Beth, what are you getting from this?
But you don't want to get older.
I think it's a difficult one because I think sometimes we use that as excuses, you know, because we can move past these things. But the older you get, the harder it is. The clients I work with that are older, it's always a lot harder because it's years and years of things that have built up. And to then take that step and rewind it, it is a lot more to work through.
Absolutely, right? And it's just the landscape of more blobs, right?
Exactly.
And given that, you know, that's the circumstance, you know, I'd like you to just look at wherever you are in that process. Could you simply create something as possible that seemed impossible simply by accepting that it is possible, right? Like,
Right. Yes, I hear you.
like you have a story in your head that somehow it's not possible to be relaxed and happy around the chaos of the boxes.
Correct.
And yet,
And also it's dusty, so it's also an allergy to the dust.
you could wear a mask or you could do something, right?
Right.
The point is that you've said quite clearly, logically, that you recognize that other people in the same situation could have a different experience, right? And you've said you said also that you recognize that you've had a different experience in other situations, that it's not always this way, right?
Correct.
So logically, there's really no logical reason why you couldn't have the experience you want.
Okay.
You notice I'm not trying to say we're trying to disappear the boxes, right? I'm not trying to say we're trying to say that you can be in New York already. What I'm saying is that given the circumstances as they are, can you see that at least it's somewhat possible that you could be a different way?
Yes.
Yes, you can have somebody else do it.
Sorry?
But you couldn't have anyone else do it. There's no way. No, there's no way. Really, that's not.
No, and that's a different question too, because there's a gradation of what is possible in the physical world and not, right? Not possible that you're going to be in New York tonight with all your stuff moved.
And also, it's also divesting yourself of a lifetime of possessions.
Yeah, but what is the meaning of that?
Which we certainly have done. Say what?
When you say that, the question becomes, what is the meaning of that? Why even bring that up?
Because it's part of your identity, actually.
Well, it is or it isn't. That's your choice.
Mm.
To a point.
No. It's entirely your choice.
But yes, I mean, once it's gone and you realize it wasn't all that important.
Right. What I'm saying is the choice you're making is that object part of your identity?
Right. It was also, like you said, a process.
Well, the process is also up to you, right? Some people say that they need 5 years to get over their divorce. Some people get married again a month later, right?
Yes.
There's no logical rule about these things, right? But what is logical is that in the real world, there are things that aren't possible. It's not possible for you to be in New York tonight, moved into the house that you bought, because that house is not, you can't get into it, right?
Correct.
But it is possible, certainly much more possible than that you could enjoy packing, isn't it?
Yes, there is. Yes. I do
If you
agree.
compare the two things, the scale of possibility is radically different, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to move forward because I want to get to a couple of exercises that actually deal with creating ideas. So
Okay.
looking back at this thing we got, the limits that have been placed on our ability to be a certain way because of what happened in the past, right?
Yes.
You
Yeah.
recognize that you placed those limits on yourself.
Yeah.
The kid hit you with a
100%.
shovel, he didn't put the limit on you, right? You could have just said, oh, that's not nice, and then carried on doing the same thing, right? Yes, no, hello?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with that. The only limit is the one you set on yourself.
Yeah. Now, Felix Baumgartner is the guy that jumped out of a rocket from space and parachuted to Earth.
Wow.
It was not long ago, right? Like 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Okay, Michael Jordan also has a nice possibility quote, right, about limits. So never say never because limits are often just an illusion. So what I'm just trying to get you to consider is that the kind of limits you place on what's possible for you in the moment now, you know, you just said you agree with this, the only limit is the one you set yourself, and then you say, well, I can't overcome that limit because it's whatever, right? If you set it yourself, then there's no reason to deal with it as anything except an illusion. Another Einstein quote, he seems to have a lot of them for a guy that didn't seem to be super social, right? Live your life either as nothing is a miracle or as though everything is a miracle, right? And that touches a lot on that idea of commitment versus attachment in a way, right?
Right.
If you're committed to the idea that everything is a miracle, then no matter what happens, it's great.
It's, that's right. Everything is positive then.
Miles Davis said, do not fear mistakes, there are none.
Mhm.
Ray Charles said, there's many spokes in the wheel of life, but first we're here to explore new possibilities. So basically saying the most important thing is to be willing to explore possibilities, right? Now, how does all of this that we've just spent an hour on connect to the idea of creativity?
Well, if you have possibilities and there's no limits because everything's a miracle, then you can take a chance on your creativity.
Yeah, for sure. So in addition to that, like I want you to notice that there are a number of things that you think aren't possible for you, right? And I'm talking about you as you, not like you're going to suddenly become the king of England, right? But you, in the circumstances you're currently in, it's not possible for you to have fun. And then you come up with all kinds of explanations why that makes sense, right?
Okay.
Because you're 22 years older, because it's dusty. If you were like a Martian trying to understand humans and you were listening to that, it wouldn't make any sense at all, would it?
I don't know. I'm not a Martian.
I mean, think about it. If somebody else said that to you, right? If somebody else said, I really can't enjoy this process because I'm 22 years older than last time. Does that not sound like some kind of weird sentence they just put together out of random words?
Yep. It just, yep.
Right? If they said, I can't possibly enjoy this process because it's very dusty. You'd probably tell them to put on some kind of mask, right? Turn on some music. I don't know. What would make it enjoyable, right?
Right.
So it's very important, you know, looking at the idea of how do you start to generate more and better ideas, to realize that left alone, you'll generate many great ideas. But you don't leave your mind alone, right? We all are busy all the time telling our mind over and over again, even when we can't hear it, the ways it can be and can't be.
The ways it can what?
The ways that it can be, the ways that it can't be, right? Every day we're faced with things and we have certain ways we respond to those things that are us, right? And that's why, you know, you'll tend to come up with the kind of ideas you come up with, right? And even people will, I don't know, hire a person because they come up with the kind of ideas we need, right? Which is actually a really limited situation, because the ideas they come up with are the ones that they are left with when everything else is blocked over. Now, we talked about a couple weeks back how adaptability is the most important thing these days, right? That creativity is, in essence, one of the best definitions of creativity is simply the ability to adapt yourself so that you can come up with ways of doing things which are different than you would have come up with maybe yesterday, right? So our goal in talking about possibility is to come up with ways of being that are opening up who we are in that moment. If you do that, the information that you've gathered over the course of your life, or in this specific case with your project, is there to allow you to then have ideas. Your brain is built to have ideas, right? When you were 5 years old, you had lots of ideas. They were also shaped by your environment, by the things you were given, right? So most kids, when they make drawings at 5 years old, tend to draw pictures of houses with their parents next to it. So that's their world. Take the same kids and put them in outer space or something, they'll draw something else. But the point is, they don't sit there going, I don't have any ideas, right? Or being stuck on one way of being around stuff. So what we want to look at is going back to a couple things we've done and a couple new things. How do we actively prod our mind to come up with ideas? To me, the most important part of it, though, is to make sure that the ground has been laid, you know, for us to have those ideas. That's another famous quote, right? So you remember the circles of possibility we looked at last week, and we said, where is the block? Now that we've talked through this question of possibility a bit more, do you have a different place you put the block, or do you think it's still where you thought it was last week? Hello, hello, hello?
Yes.
Beth, still there?
Yeah, for me, like, it's still similar, because I get the ideas and I write the ideas down, but so all of the ideas are out basically. But then it comes back then down to maybe fear or confidence that the ideas are good enough.
Hmm.
So I don't
Confidence, right?
getting those ideas. It's just then to then move to the next step of the project. I have to, you know, be sure that those ideas are what I want to move forward with.
Well, you know, and actually you don't, right?
Mm-hmm.
What you have to first do is deal with the fact that the ideas you already have are good enough.
Exactly.
And if there's other better ideas, they can come up too.
Yes. Yeah.
But you tend to stifle your ideas that you might still come up with by realizing that the ones you already have are not good enough. Right?
Yeah.
So logically, why should your subconscious offer you more?
Mm.
It's not interested in like being told your ideas suck.
So true.
That doesn't motivate it, right? It doesn't make it want to go, oh, I'll prove you wrong. It doesn't think that way.
Yeah.
If you hit your dog in the head, you know, it doesn't sit there and try to get you to, it just gets away from you, right?
Mm.
Maybe a bit later it might come back again, but, you know, at first its first response is going to be like, whoa, that's not cool, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so when we're dealing with that, with the concept of ideation, right? I want to just remember where that happens, right? Right in the middle. Remember that? And it's surrounded by, very importantly, incubation and marination. That's why the first mail, which you already got because of the problem yesterday, is going to ask you to do nothing for the day, right? Let yourself experience the idea of saying, like, you know what, I'm not going to even think about this project at all today. Beth, that might be hard for you, and you guys might be hard for you because it's something you're doing all the time, right?
Mm.
But I want you to take one day where you just stop doing it. And the results you'll get from that will be far better than the hours of day you would have gotten out of it, right?
Mm.
Because what's critically important is before we try to come up with new ideas is first of all, to make sure all of this is nicely put together and then to just take a breath. Because this is how it happens naturally, right? You know that old stuff about the guy taking a bath and then like figures out the principle of displaced volume, right? Hello?
What's the story of a man taking a bath? What?
Archimedes supposedly like discovered the principle of displaced volume by taking a bath. He was trying to figure out how to measure the value of a crown that the king had given him to figure out how much gold was in the crown. And he tried various things, weighing it and trying to figure out, you know, if there was a certain amount of gold, then it would. So he tried these various things, and then he got in the bath, and the water spilled out, and he realized that if you put things in the water, it will displace the amount of water that the volume of the thing takes up, and so on. So because the crown was in a funny shape, he couldn't measure the volume accurately. So he realized that he could measure the volume accurately if he put it into a tub, right? So the story is that this happened by accident. He couldn't figure out the problem. He sat in a bath, and suddenly he realized the answer, right? More appropriately, you guys ever had the experience of like you're doing absolutely nothing, and suddenly you figure out the problem that you couldn't figure out? Like you're walking along, or you're heading somewhere else, or you're going to the gym, anything like that, and then suddenly like, whoa, there's the answer to that thing.
Yeah.
Right? The more you try to come up with the answer, the less you get it. So the incubation period is very important, that you give time between taking in all the information and putting it out. Now, in reality, you are going through this process thousands and thousands and thousands of times just to do one thing, right? So Beth, in constructing your course, you're not just doing this once. You're going through this every day, constantly, over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is, to write an email, we do this 1,000 times.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to slow down and notice how to change the way you're doing stuff, it's important to notice that we need that period of incubation before we try to come up with ideas. If we push too hard, nothing comes, right? So once we have that pause, we can then look at how do we generate more ideas. And one way we generate them is by divergence thinking, right? So we try to come up with as many ideas as possible, and then in the end, we then select from those ideas. But again, most people want to rush to the right answer, right? And so we don't take the time to marinate the ideas we have. We simply find one idea we like and go with it, right? Make sense?
Yep.
So we'll try to come up with lots of ideas, but we don't. On the way to those lots of ideas, we kind of stop and say, those are enough. Let me choose the one that works. But when actually the way this process really works best is to give it a little bit of space again before we decide, right? At the same time, what's very helpful is to jog the mind with guides, right, that will help us come up with more and more ideas. And we've done a couple exercises already that hinted at that, like the world's worst idea. We did that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We did, right?
What is it?
The world's worst idea, where we talk about coming up with the worst possible answers to your problem.
No, we didn't do that, did we?
I thought we did that
I don't
last week.
remember. Do you remember?
I'm pretty sure we did.
Okay.
We talked about the sheep going through Central Park, or
Yes, we did talk about this.
Yeah. So world's worst ideas, is a great exercise because it forces you to think of ideas that you don't even think are good ideas, right?
Right.
So it gets your mind to stretch farther in what it believes is possible, right? Because your mind's only going to come up with ideas that it thinks are possible. If you, like we saw from the Filipino thing at the beginning, if you absolutely don't think that thing's possible, you're not going to think of it. Someone else might come and suggest it to you, and then it's in your head, but you won't think of it, right? So here's one game that's really nice. It's called Nonsense Realities, okay? I'm going to talk you through it, and then one of you guys can apply it quickly to your project. Okay, so let's say you wanted to build a better fly trap. Yeah?
Okay.
So you can break down the challenge into some categories, right? Let's say, I mean, you really have no idea what you're going to do. You just got told, please build a better fly trap. So one of the things you can break it down into is what material will you use to build it, right? Another thing you can do is look at what location you would place the fly trap in. You could look at how do you attract the flies, right? And you could look at how do you actually capture them. So once you've defined, and 4 is a good number, 4 categories that suit your project, you can then go down the list and make maybe 4 answers to that question, right? And it's a great exercise to do with your partner, your productivity partner, friend, whatever, because it's great to get more ideas. But what you really want to do is not give these things the most serious, best choices. Again, you want to incorporate the idea of the world's worst ideas at some point, come up with some crazy stuff, right? So for example, you could make a list of material. It could be wood, plastic, poo, or metal, right? Just a list of, it's just random. You could say the location for the fly trap. You could put it on the table. You could hang it from the ceiling. You could put it in the window or put it outside your house, hanging outside the door. You could attract the flies with hormones. You could put rotting food in the fly trap. You could use breadcrumbs that are not rotting, or you could make a fly disco that would get them to come dance, right? And catching the flies, you could use glue, you could use frogs, you could put a fish bowl and have the fish eat them, or you could put an automated gun that shoots them, right? Those are all possible ways you could do it. Now, having made that list, you could then have already chosen a number from 1 to 4 for each thing, or you could roll a die, or you could go online and find an automatic number generator. But then you basically you have to find a way to, without being logical about it, select one answer to each question. So you'll see here, I've selected the idea. You could make a fly trap from plastic, put it on the table, have a fly disco inside, but a fish is going to eat them, right? Now, weirdly, you can't believe how fast this sometimes gets people or companies to come up with new perspectives on their problem that have nothing to do with what's on the board, right? So, who would like to do this with their project?
Yes.
Not me.
John's gonna do it.
No,
Yes.
I don't get it.
Well, the material could be, we could have boxes.
You don't copy the categories. You put your own categories that apply to your
Oh,
project.
you're gonna do your own categories.
Yeah.
So what if you're not
Part
smart
of this
enough?
is just an example of how you could apply it to a fly trap, right? Beth, you want to try?
If I'm really honest, I'm too tired to come up with ideas right now.
Okay, look, let's do it like this then. You guys, you guys are going to get a mail in a day or two that's going to ask you to do this, right?
Yeah, no, I've already got a couple of things that are coming to mind, but to do 4 of each, I know that I'm going to struggle.
Well, that's why we're here to help you, but it's fine. We'll skip this. We're actually getting quite late. So lateral thinking is a different way of approaching a problem than divergence thinking, right? In lateral thinking, we're looking for a different way of viewing the challenge. For example, if I asked you to solve this puzzle with divergence thinking, you would look for the best way to get from A to B through the maze, right?
Yes.
But if I asked you to solve it with lateral thinking, what could possibly be one answer for how to get from A to B?
Jump over it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wait, what path? Oh,
Jump over it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't tell you how high the maze is. I didn't even tell you if it's actually just drawn on the floor with a pen, right? So we often will make assumptions about situations. If we try to take lateral thinking approaches to those things, we'll generate new ideas that never would have come up before, right? So one way of lateral thinking that's often used is the 6 hats. You guys ever seen this?
no.
Seth?
Not me.
Okay. So the idea behind the 6 thinking hats is extremely simple, but often very difficult to pull off. Okay. The idea behind the 6 thinking hats is that each hat represents a perspective, a way of looking at something. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And so that perspective is something you're going to put on and only see the situation from that perspective. So let me just go through what the hats mean, right? The first hat, the white hat, is the factual hat, right? You want to look at your situation from a perspective in which you can see things the way that they are now, right? So if there's information, for example, how many boxes do you have to pack, right? What are the dates that you have to finish by? And if you're not sure, what are the possible dates? So you talked about some of that already, right?
Right.
Basically, to get as thoroughly as possible, get a list out of what are the facts of the situation. Okay? This can generally benefit you because you'll come up with a lot more data and details than you actually realized you have. The red hat is about emotion. Okay? You want to put forward how the situation feels. Now, something important I want to clarify for you is, the 6 hats was originally created as a way to critique an idea, right? What I want you to use it for is to generate ideas with it. So if you were to look at the situation you're in from an emotional perspective, how does it make you feel, right? What do you feel like you could do instinctually, even if it doesn't make logical sense? That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you want to look at your situation from that perspective of a very emotional person who's not interested in facts, who's interested in feelings. The third hat is the yellow hat. It's like the sunshine hat, right? If you're doing a critical analysis, you're going to be looking for the benefits and the positives. But when you're looking at it as an idea generator, you want to be looking at how does a positive view of the situation give you new ideas. Generally, it will tend to create more ideas that are similar to the ones you might already have. So if you take a positive view of the situation around packing, for instance, right?
Yeah.
You might say, okay, what are the positive things about the situation?
Right.
Huh?
Yes.
Right. So, for instance, maybe you could say it's positive that you are moving to a new place, and like you said, that could be exciting, right? So it might start giving you ideas that are based on that positive viewpoint. The black hat is the opposite. The black hat, you want to look at caution and critique, right? Basically, you look at the situation, you say, actually, this sucks, right? So what kind of ideas might you get from that perspective? For example, you said earlier something about somebody else could do it for you, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's suppose that was acceptable to you. That's a black hat idea. You see why?
Yes, because yes.
Okay, so black hat then gives you the feeling of like, you know what, there's no solution to this problem, so let me get somebody else to do this. The yellow hat would give you more of a, how do you change yourself to be able to get into things, right? The green hat is basically a crazy thinking hat. You want to come up with crazy ideas that don't even make sense. You could get a robot to pack for you. Beth,
That
you
is
could
going
hire
to
someone on
be
Fiverr
possible.
to write your entire-
Another 10 years, Michael.
Yeah.
Too expensive.
But the point of this is not to come up with all the reasons why this is not workable. It's to come up with the ideas for why it is, right? So you would simply get down the idea that, green hat, okay, robots can pack for me, or I can actually burn down the house and everything in it and claim the insurance. Whatever like crazy nonsense you could come up with. I've had groups, had a group win a competition by coming up with a green hat approach to the fourth industrial revolution, which was just make it stop, right? And from that, they came up with ideas around how they could actually internally as a community make it stop. And that won them like study trips to Mozambique for 2 weeks, So it doesn't matter how crazy the idea is, it could lead to something great. Okay, and then finally the blue hat is like the big thinking hat, putting together all the thinking you've done in the previous 5 hats. What is the conclusion? How do you make a decision about the new ideas, right? Now, in this process, we don't want to get too deep into blue hat thinking. We don't want to rush to judgment, but you can still make some kind of overall conclusion, right? Here's a bunch of ideas to work with, for example. That all makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Does anybody want to go through that with your project?
Do you want to?
You don't have to, as long as you've clearly understood this.
I'm going to just.
Okay, so does anybody want to go through this?
I think I get it. I understand.
Okay. Because look, there's a whole lot of ways to trigger more ideas, right? Some of them are really simple, like just write down a whole lot of ideas. But the 2 that we've looked at here are, I think, really great ones. But there's ways you can do it with groups that work really well, like using random words and then having people just keep making up new words, right? Until you get to a certain point, you stop, and then you see what that word does to give you insight into your problem. But these 2 exercises separately are really productive, right? The nonsense reality, it really works well to get people to think differently about the situation. And the 6 thinking hats also, it really works well in a more lateral way of stepping aside from, the process of thinking the way you have been and trying to think in a different way, right? I mean, if you're working on your own, there's probably certain of these hats that suit your automatic, approach to things, and others that don't, right? That doesn't really matter. What you want to practice when you do it is practice, assuming that all of them are workable for you. Does that all make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's a third thing you can do, which is take these two techniques and put them together, right? And it's kind of hard to explain without doing it, but essentially you can make this diagram here, right? And then once you've selected your 4 answers, you can run a 6 Thinking Hats analysis on all 4 of them, right? So that you look at, for each of these answers, how can you expand it to come up with a process that leads you to a conclusion about all 4 of these areas. Does that make some kind of sense?
Mm-hmm.
It's a very effective thing I've done it's really effective with groups. It makes it really like, crazy stuff comes up and becomes workable. Right? As I said, another technique that is great is the world's worst ideas. It really can generate some interesting thoughts that you wouldn't have had, right? I do think a polar bear with ice skates is a pretty bad idea.
I think it's an awesome idea.
So go back to this question, right? And I asked you to look at the question of that list you made before. Putting aside the ones that are really physically impossible, like Beth, you can't be done with your
Of course.
work right now because you're not. Putting aside that and replacing those impossible ones with how would you be if?
How would I be?
So, for example, Beth, how would you be if you did have your entire thing finished?
I suppose I'd be celebrating. But
Okay. And how would that be if you were celebrating?
awesome. Yeah. And you know what? I know I'm going to get it done. And I know that it's going to be, it is fine. Like, I think it's just sometimes along the way, you're right. It's about pushing yourself past the certain things and being who you need to be to get it done,
Right. And here's an interesting twist, right? And this applies to all of you. If you were a person who is celebrating, yeah, right now, and I don't mean necessarily you have to go out and take a trip for the weekend to Sun City or something. I'm just saying, like, if that was how you were being, right?
Mm-hmm.
As you do the work you have to do to get done the work.
It'll become more enjoyable, definitely.
So it'll be more enjoyable. Do you think the results might be better?
Definitely. And I actually, there was one thing I did like about that Smart C goals, of which I've actually written out for this week, and also written out how I'm going to celebrate once I get it done, because it's something I tell my clients to do too. You must celebrate every win. Like, it's not just the end result, it's all the small things you do to show up for yourself. So
yeah. And I mean, so what did you put down for your celebration?
I put down that I might go for a massage.
And after you go for a massage, I know your body will be a certain way. How will your mind be?
Relaxed.
Relaxed.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I
So
might get some more ideas.
Well, you know where I'm going with that, right?
Yeah, of course. No, it is. It's all about finding ways to calm your mind down and allowing space for the ideas to come through. So,
What is it that's uncalming your mind?
right now, like I do find, like I've been able to find some relative calm and have made quite big progress. I think it's now the next step where I've got all the ideas out and now I have to kind of actually start making the workbooks and the scripts and all of that. And then it's again going through all the ideas. I need to make sure that I get over this. That is it insightful enough? Is it transformative enough? Like I need to move past that now because that's what is blocking me.
Okay.
Mhm.
So what way of being is that?
That's a way of being doubtful, which I know that I can work past. I know I've got the tools to do it, so I need to just use them.
Yeah. So being doubtful and skeptical, that kind of thing, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So granted that you can't be finished with that whole process now,
Mm-hmm.
if you approach the process from the perspective of someone who has finished it, in other words, you're celebrating and you're relaxed,
Mm.
and you could manage to convince yourself to be that way all the time when you're working on the project.
Yeah,
You've already said that would make a big difference, right?
of course. Yeah. I
You
need
have
to
more
put
ideas, right?
in. Yeah, no, exactly.
Because the bottom line is like, what I've found to be the case is that getting lots of ideas is not about forcing them to come out. It's about letting go of the things that prevent them from coming out.
Yeah. And when the times when that happens, like it just pours out of me. So it is. I just need. I can. If it happens, I know that it's possible. It's just now going to every step I take. I need to get back to that place. So and choose to be that person because I know I can be.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's a choice you
Yeah.
have to make every time.
No, exactly. And I think this is it. And like during this process, I've realized it's not that you do it once and then every time you go back to the project, it's flows. You have to go back as choosing to be the person that can have it and do it. So
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the idea behind this particular process is that once you've gone through the steps, you can actually do the whole process in like 5 minutes.
yeah.
And therefore, you could do it every time you sit down and work, right? And then,
Yeah.
So can you see, like we said much earlier, that there are basically two kinds of wishes that you could have, right? One is wishes that are pretty much impossible. And those are things you say you wish you could, but you know in your heart that you know you can't. And then there's the kind that are based on the present and on who you're being in the present. And you kind of feel like you can't really, but you lump them together with the others as it's just not real. It's not possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can you see a little bit more clearly from what we've gone through this evening that if you choose the ones that you actually can make happen, right? And actively get rid of the ones that you can't. Like get rid of the idea that you've identified in your head that it would be nice to be finished. And actually embrace the fact that you're not finished, because that's much better than being finished.
Yeah, because and it is much better than being finished because there's so much more to come out, and I know that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're lying in a way, right? When you say you wish it could be finished already.
Yeah, of course. You're lying to yourself that you wish it could be finished because the whole journey of it is the doing of the steps in the meantime. like
Yep.
everything in life. So,
So a really effective way to start getting more ideas around what you're doing or have or feel more comfortable with the ideas you have and so on is to really get clear on what is possible, not possible,
yeah,
right? And when it's not possible, just like stop thinking anywhere in your head that you wish that it was.
yeah, yeah,
And if it is possible, stop resisting the possibility of it and embrace it fully, right?
yeah, yeah.
Now, you guys in Kentucky see how that works on your side?
Yeah, yes.
I mean, do you really wish you were in New York already?
Do we really wish we were in New York?
No, because she's not ready.
Well, also it's bittersweet. It's saying goodbye to a whole life we've had here for 22 years.
Yeah. So wouldn't it be better to do that in a way that you're enjoying?
You're right.
You know? And if you open yourself to the idea that you can enjoy the process you're going through, not only that, but that is what's happening, right? You will start to have ideas that match that. You will start to get ideas of ways to make that happen. They will come to you on their own. But as long as you're resisting with wishing that it was different than it is, right? Because there's only the present, there's only the now. It can't be different than it is. You can be a certain way, take actions to change it for the future, but the possibility has to happen now, like you said a long time ago, right? The future is just a result. So the most important question I have for you guys is, can you see a difference in the way you approach this list at the beginning of the call and now?
Yes.
Ask the question again. What? Can you see
Look
the
at the
list?
list of things that you wish you could.
Right.
Can you see a difference between how that occurs for you now as opposed to the beginning of the call?
Right. Yes.
What's that difference?
The difference is what is not reality at all and not a possibility to what you can do that's a possibility and change the future, therefore, or bring it into the future.
Okay, and tangibly though, do you see a difference? Does the list look different to you?
What, Michael?
Does the list actually look different to you? Does it look like a clearer thing?
Yes, I wouldn't say be in New York already, but to enjoy what we have here because it's going to also be gone.
Yeah. In terms of coming up with new ideas of the ways to do that, you know, right now you're only operating on the basis of the ideas you already would have had in your life the way your life is, right?
Right.
But if you open yourself to the idea that anything is possible now in your brain, right?
Yep. Yes.
And by possible now, we mean certain, right? It's not possibility like maybe someday, maybe it'll happen. It's possibility like right now, it is possible.
Right.
So it is possible right now that you can enjoy this process all the time, right up until the moment that it ends. The question then arises, how do you do that, right?
Correct.
Now, if you ask yourself that question instead, right, if you accept that it is 100% possible and ask yourself the question, how? You start to get more and more ideas of how to do that.
Correct.
What are the ways that you could actually be around it? What are some of the ways that you could come up with that you wouldn't have thought of before? Does that all make sense?
Yes, it does.
Does anybody have any questions?
No, that was good. This was a really great session, Michael. Thank you.
Thanks,
It
Beth.
was,
It's my
thank
favorite
you,
one.
Michael.
Yeah, no, it really does. It really does open up your mind to the fact that, you know, you're wasting your energy on things that aren't actually even possible, and you can open up your mind so much more by focusing on the possibility. So, no, it's great.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Raining in
Michael.
Johannesburg.
You what?
It's raining in Johannesburg.
It is. It's awesome. It's been so hot.
It raining?
Raining and it's hot, she said.
It's hot.
Yeah, we've had a heat wave, so we're very excited that it's raining.
See, there you go. You looked at the possibility of the good thing for it.
Exactly.
Yes.
All right, thank you
Well,
guys.
it's 30 degrees here, so there you go.
You've also just as hot as us then. Yeah, gosh.
No, it's
So
not.
30 degrees
You guys are-
cold.
you guys are-
Oh,
Fahrenheit.
degrees
Open language.
Fahrenheit. Okay, yeah, not Celsius. That is definitely not as hot.
No. We're going into the winter.
Winter, yes,
You're
yes.
going into your, summer.
We're in the middle of our summer now. It's very hot, yeah.
And you guys are having a drought, right?
No.
We were basically, they thought we were having a drought, but it's been raining quite a bit now, so it's good.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Cool, guys. Enjoy your night.
Oh.
Thank you again very much for your patience with yesterday, and try to take the one day to not do anything tomorrow.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Bye, Beth.
Bye. Bye. Sleep
Bye,
well.
buddy.
Bye.